Do you want a voting systems in your maps just like this? Watch until the end to find out how. Epic just added 2 new devices, the voting group device and the voting option device. These 2 devices work together to make a voting system that is now simple and not as complicated as it used to be. Today I will show you how to use these devices and set them up in a voting system. In this tutorial it'll be for loadouts that will eventually set up into item granters that will grant the loadouts to the players for the loadout that has received the most votes after the voting timer is completed. But let me know down in the comments if you want a tutorial for voting on other things like minigames or maps. First, to get started, add in a voting group device and 3 voting option devices. In the voting group device, add in a voting group name. I'm going to call it Loadout Choice, but you can call it whatever you want. Then, in max votes, you can select how many votes one player can have. So if you want the player to be able to vote for multiple choices, then just increase this to whatever you want. The max would be the number of options you have set up, because you can't vote for 4 if there are only 3 options. If you only want the player to have 1 vote, but want to allow the player to switch their vote, have max votes set to 1, but put allow vote switching to on. Then, set the time limit to how long you want the voting period to be. Right now, this option is a little buggy. The way to fix this is with the timer device. Place this timer device down and change the duration to how long you want the voting duration to be. Mine is at 15 seconds just for this tutorial, but yours could be a minute, 30 seconds, whatever you want. Then change the completion behavior to reset and the timer running text to something like voting ends in ... Next, place 2 triggers down. Name one trigger voting begins and the other voting ends trigger. Now, go to your voting group device and scroll over to functions and put begin voting when receiving from voting begins trigger on triggered, then also put end vote when receiving from voting ends trigger on triggered. Now, go back to your timer device and in its functions put start when receiving from voting begins trigger on triggered. Then, go to events and put on success send event to voting ends trigger. A way you can trigger this voting begins trigger is with the mutator zone device. So when the players enter an area in your map, the voting period starts. To do this, place down a mutator zone device and go into its events. Then put on player entering zone send event to voting begins trigger. You can then change the other settings to your liking. Next, I'll start setting up the voting process. For this tutorial, I'm going to use 3 options to vote from, but you can do how many options you want for your map. To do this, place down 3 button devices and 3 pop-up dialog devices. I've renamed these dialog devices to Loadout 1, Loadout 2, and Loadout 3, dialog device voting. In these dialog devices settings, add in a title and description. Something like vote for as the title and do you want to vote for Loadout 1 or remove your current vote as the description. Then scroll down and change button 1 text to vote and button 2 text to remove vote. I'm going to be calling all the loadout options as Loadout 1, Loadout 2 and Loadout 3 throughout the tutorial, but I would recommend you actually calling it whatever the loadout is whenever I say that. So instead of Loadout 1, you could call it AR and shotgun. For Loadout 2, you could call it SMG on shotgun, things like that. Then, go to the buttons you placed, and in the settings, you can change things like trigger sounds and interaction radius to whatever you want, but make sure to change the interaction text to something like vote for Loadout 1, then vote for Loadout 2, and vote for Loadout 3 on the separate buttons. Then, scroll over to events and put on interact, send event to Loadout 1, dialog device voting. Now copy these settings in the pop-up dialog devices buttons and then change the settings to its corresponding text and functions. What I mean by this is put these exact same settings in button 2 and button 3, but obviously rename it from vote for Loadout 1 to vote for Loadout 2 and Loadout 3. Then in the functions, instead of having send event to Loadout 1 dialog device voting, you'd have it send to Loadout 2 dialog device voting and Loadout 3 dialog device voting. Next, add in 3 voting option devices, and in the voting group, put in Loadout choice. Because that was our voting group name that we put in earlier in the voting group device, now this is very crucial. These 2 names have to be the exact same. That's the reason I've put it as Loadout choice in both devices. If they're not the same, the system will not work. Then, put voting option text to Loadout 1. I'm pretty sure this is also bugged right now because nothing actually shows up in game when you put in the setting, but I'm still going to name it Loadout 1, 2, and 3. Then scroll over to the functions and put cast vote when receiving from the pop-up dialog device on responding to button 1. Then also put rescind vote when receiving from the same pop-up dialog device on responding. These are the Loadout 1 dialog device vote that we've just made before, just to clear any confusion. Now, do the same with your other voting option devices along with their coordinated pop-up dialog devices. Same settings, same functions, just obviously with their proper number. Next, place down 3 more pop-up dialog devices. These will show a confirmation message once you have voted, saying that you have voted successfully. I have named these dialog devices Loadout 1, Loadout 2, and Loadout 3 dialog device confirmation. Then go to all settings, and for the titles, I just put vote counted, and the description for the first one will be you have voted for Loadout 1 successfully, and then the second one will be Loadout 2, and the third one will say Loadout 3. Then change the response type setting to 1 button in all of these devices, and set the button 1 text to just say OK, just leave it as that. Now, scroll over to functions and put show when receiving from Loadout 1 voting option on voting option selected. Then do the same thing with the other pop-up dialog devices and their corresponding voting option devices. Next, place down 3 more pop-up dialog devices to show up stating which option won when the voting is ended. I have named these Loadout 1, Loadout 2, and Loadout 3 dialog device winner. In the settings, change the title to voting has ended in all of them, then change the description to say something like Loadout 1 has the most votes. Then change the response type to 1 button again, and in the functions put show when receiving from Loadout 1 voting option on vote completed winner. Then copy these same settings for your other dialog devices that you've just placed and change the description to Loadout 2 has the most votes or Loadout 3 has the most votes, and then obviously make sure the functions is linked up with their correct voting option devices. Now, to give the winning loadout to all players once the voting time is finished, place down an item granter with the settings receiving players all, grant all items, cycle behavior, wrap, ownership of dropped item, all. Then, in the functions, put grant item when receiving from Loadout 1 dialog device winner. Then copy this item granter 2 more times and drop the different loadouts into the 3 item granters, and then change all the functions to their corresponding dialog device. If you want the amount of votes to be shown during the voting process that each option has, all you need is a score manager device. Get this and place it down just behind your buttons so the score is shown while they're voting and while they're in front of it. In the settings, set the score value to 0, score change when activated to 1, visible in game to only number, and I would also recommend setting play audio to off. Then scroll over to functions and put increment when receiving from Loadout 1 voting option device on voting option selected. Then also put decrement to the same voting option device on voting option rescinded. Then just copy the score manager and change the voting option device to the correct one in the functions. And now you should be done. Let's try it out. As you can see, it works. You now have a working voting system for loadout selection. This can be used in maps for box fights or zone wars. And that's going to be it for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment for what tutorial you want next.